I guess because of how the rental market was, it kind of made us think about, would it make more sense to buy? That was a thought that never even crossed my mind. I don't know, I was at a loss for words. I couldn't even like fathom paying $1,000 more for something that was smaller and for something that was farther away from that location. It was insanity. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. As you can see, we are in a new angle in my office space, and I'm sitting just on the floor here because I wanted to get really cozy with you guys. I have a really interesting topic that I wanted to talk about today, and that is all about my home buying journey that I went on in the last couple months. If you didn't know, I purchased, or I should say my partner and I purchased our very first home here in Vancouver, BC a couple months ago, and I've been meaning to do this video. I know you guys have been waiting for this video, so here it is. I initially thought I would do two parts to this video, which is first deciding on why we ended up buying instead of continuing to rent, and then splitting it up with the finances, the mortgage, and the real estate part of it. I thought, why not put it all in one video? Because I don't think it's that dramatic. That is what we're doing today, and that's why we're on the floor. I also made myself a tea in this like little tumbler. So grab your drink of choice, whether that's coffee, water, tea, whatever it is you want to drink. Treat this as like a FaceTime with a friend, because I think that that's what I want the vibes to be, and enjoy. If you just stumbled upon this video and this is your first video of mine, hi, my name is Raisa, and thank you so much for watching. I typically do videos around personal finances. I also started talking a lot about my small business and moving into this office space earlier this year, and sometimes I talk about luxury goods. So if you're into any of that, please make sure you're subscribed down below. I think I wanted to give you guys a little bit of context before we kind of get into it. If you didn't know, I moved to Vancouver around 6 years ago. I'm originally from Ontario, specifically in Mississauga, and I moved here for a job that I was really excited about 6 years ago, and I actually still work for that company, and it's just been the best decision I've ever made to kind of bite the bullet and move to Vancouver. It has changed my life in so many different ways, and that can be a totally different video if you guys want to know more about how moving to a different city has changed my life. But yeah, that was 6 years ago in 2017, and I moved here on my own, and I started looking for apartments, and I use Craigslist because they use Craigslist here in Vancouver versus in Ontario. I know we're really big on Kijiji. So I looked on Craigslist to see if I could get a place here while I was still in Ontario, and it was so difficult to find a really good place that is really close to work but also in an affordable price range. Everything that I was looking at was over 2K, and at that time that was a lot of money, and I know right now that's probably a really good price, but I knew that I couldn't afford to live on my own when I first moved out here in Vancouver. So immediately I knew that I had to get a roommate. So when I first moved here, I had one roommate, and I paid I think around $1,400, so we just split the rent. That was a lot of money for me at that time, but I knew that I wanted to give this a shot. So I stayed in that place for 3 months. I stayed for a short time because I actually got kicked out of that place. She ended up wanting to rent it to her friend, and that was like, again, a whole nother story. It was so devastating to hear. I thought it was a sign from the universe that I should just go home, because honestly, like, moving here on my own was very difficult, and to hear the news 3 months later that I needed to move out of the place that I was renting at, I was like, oh no, this is a sign that I should move back, or this was a sign that this was a bad idea. But we've moved past that, so I decided to stay, and I looked for another apartment. My second apartment here, I had 2 roommates, and again, rent was around like $1,250. It was a little bit less because I shared it with 2 other people. And then I moved one last time before I moved in with my partner. So I moved in to Olympic Village, and I moved in with one roommate at the time, and she was really great. What ended up happening is my partner ended up moving here as well at around 1 year after I moved here. We didn't move in together initially just because I don't think we were ready to be living together in that stage of our relationship, which was totally fine. I ended up moving in with him a couple months later, and that is where we have been living ever since then. So I think I moved in with him maybe in, I want to say 2018 or 2019. I'm not exactly sure what the year was. His rent at that time was like $2,100. So we ended up splitting that. So my rent was $1,050 living with him, and then the pandemic happened, and I feel like the pandemic just changed everything. Our rent prices started to go up. I think our housing prices have always been really high anyway, and at around that time there was not even a thought in my mind that I would be able to purchase a home here in Vancouver because of how expensive things are. So I was kind of just accepting of the fact that I might be renting for a really long time. I also wasn't in any rush. I didn't know anything about mortgages and just all of that stuff. So it wasn't really in my mind to move or to buy a place. We were very happy with where we were at. In terms of location, the rent price that we were paying, etc. Okay, now that you know all of that background story, let's jump into 2023 in September. We were on a trip. I think we went to Seattle for a weekend, and then my partner got a random email from the owner, and they told him that they were going to be selling the place that we were renting from them. And that was such a heart sinker. I remember just feeling so much dread because I knew that we would have to move, and I did not want to move. There was a lot of reasons why. One of them is I still had my small business working out of my 1-bedroom apartment, so there was a lot of inventory there, and that was obviously prior to getting this office space. There was just a lot of stuff, and I didn't want to deal with it, especially at that time of the year, which is like the end of September, early October. Yeah, I was honestly very devastated, and my partner was as well. And then we started to look on Craigslist to see where we could potentially move to, because they were obviously selling the place and we couldn't stay there anymore. So when we started looking, there was not a single 1-bedroom apartment in the location that we wanted, in even like remotely the same price range that we were paying at. I think at that time we were paying like still $2,100 or $2,200. It might have increased slightly to $2,200, but that was still a really good price. And when we started looking in late 2023 for another place to rent, it was impossible. Everything was like in the $3K. I think I remember seeing a listing from the exact same building, same sort of size as ours, and it was $3,300, and I just gasped. Like, it was so crazy. The rental market has just skyrocketed since we started renting, so it was such a shocker to us. I don't know, I was at a loss for words. I couldn't even fathom paying $1,000 more for something that was smaller and for something that was farther away from that location. It was insanity. It was like that for a couple weeks where we were just looking to see, and there was really nothing. I feel like if we found something at the $2,500 mark, we would find it cheap, or I guess affordable, because everything else was like $2,700, $2,800 and all the way up to $3,000, which is insane. I guess because of how the rental market was, it kind of made us think about, would it make more sense to buy? That was a thought that never even crossed my mind before, because buying, as I mentioned, was just not in the horizon, at least for me, because I don't know, maybe I just never looked into it, but I thought I couldn't afford it. Every person who told me that they bought a place or were looking for a place were always saying it's in the millions in Vancouver for a condo, and that was insane, and I didn't want to have a mortgage that was that large. As I mentioned, I didn't really know anything about the home buying process at all, but I had a very good friend of mine who is actually a real estate agent, who I could really talk to and ask him all my stupid questions about real estate and buying a home, and he was just so generous and gracious with his time and his answers, and made me feel like all of my questions were valid and no question was stupid. So I knew immediately that if we were going to buy a place, he would be the person that I would go to. As I was talking to him, my partner and I started to look at the properties around the area and how much a 1-bedroom apartment in Vancouver would be. I think that around that time they were hovering around $700 to $750, and interest was also very high at that time. I think it still is, but at that time specifically, for some reason, interest rates were just skyrocketing. I think because in 2023 inflation was really high, so there was a lot of variables during that time. But it's not like we were thinking, okay, we can't rent, so now we're gonna buy. We were kind of just like dipping our toes into the buying market to see what it was like, but we were still very much open to renting. We were always still looking on Craigslist, and we were also looking at, I think it was MLS, where we were looking at listings just to see if it was something that we could afford. So we were doing research for both, and obviously what ended up winning out is that we ended up buying a place. That was kind of the decision between buying versus renting for us. I kind of want to get into the finances side of things and how we actually made the leap and made the decision. When I was talking to my real estate agent, the first thing he said is, are you pre-approved for a mortgage? I did not know what that meant at all, and he was like, you should talk to a mortgage broker. And I was like, I don't know what they do. I don't know if I have to pay them. I'm not even sure if I'm gonna buy. And he's like, no, just have a conversation with them over the phone and kind of give them like rough estimates of like the numbers of how much you made, how much debt you have, how much you have saved, if you have a down payment, etc. So he gave me a number of, I think, a mortgage broker that he has worked with. So because I trusted my real estate agent friend, I trusted his opinions and the people that he was recommending. So I had a phone conversation with this woman who was a mortgage broker here in Vancouver, and I told her roughly our numbers, and she kind of did a calculation for us to see how much we would be pre-approved for. Both my partner and I work a 9-to-5 job. Because of that, I guess like our income is more stable. I think it might be a little bit harder for self-employed people. I'm not quite sure, don't quote me on that, but I think because we do have a 9-to-5, it was a little bit easier to kind of get a quote of how much we could be pre-approved for. I think she said roughly like $850,000, and I was like, whoa, that is like more than enough, because I don't think we would buy a home for anything more than $700K, which is the going price for a 1-bedroom apartment here. That was kind of like a rough estimate, and kind of signaled that we could continue going on this route because my mortgage broker felt like we would be pre-approved for a mortgage. So I think the next step with that is like actually having a down payment and how much of a down payment you want to put down, as well as how much is your monthly like mortgage payment. What I told her is that we would like to pay around the $3,000 mark, including our maintenance, our home insurance, and just like the mortgage in general. So like all of those combined, our total monthly would be $3,000. And I think that proved to be quite difficult. So she gave us a mortgage calculator that was actually very, very handy. So you essentially would input how much the home would be, how much the strata fees are, your maintenance fees. So you would include all of that, and it would then spit out a number of how much you would be paying monthly if you bought a house for that price. So we were kind of playing around with that calculator for a bit, and I think the sweet spot was between $650,000 to $675,000. As I mentioned, a lot of the homes were selling for $700 to $750, and that was just kind of the reality of it. Though my real estate agent did say like you could negotiate, that kind of gave us a little bit of hope. We were very, very keen on staying in the place that we were currently renting. We knew that the owners were selling, and we were wanting to know how much they were going to sell it for. I think we had a discussion around like, do we want to move farther so it's a little bit cheaper and we can get a bigger place, maybe a 2-bedroom in Richmond or in Burnaby or wherever, just kind of in the suburbs of Vancouver. And I think we both collectively decided that right now we want to prioritize the convenience, the time it takes to get to work and all of that, at least in this like stage of our lives. So we decided that we didn't need a bigger home. We actually wanted to stay exactly where we were, and I think that was a really big perk. At least for myself, I saw that as a big perk of not having to physically move anything, because we were already living there. We would just basically buy the home from the sellers if the price was right. We were very, very keen on staying in that same area. We were looking at other places, we toured at other places, but as we were looking at other places, I think it just made us fall in love with where we were at that much more. It was very close to our studios where we work out and where we go to the gym. Our work, obviously, it's also very close to this office, which is really nice. So we really valued the location of the place. However, where it takes a bit of a turn is where the seller priced the condo at. So we were waiting for a couple weeks to see how much they would price it at, and my real estate agent was talking to their real estate agent and they priced it at $700,000. And I was kind of sad because I feel like that was really not in the budget. We were still using the mortgage calculator that the mortgage broker sent to us, and I was really hoping for something like $650,000. So they priced it $50,000 more than what we were really willing to pay for. And my real estate agent was saying that we could try to bring them down. So we ended up making an offer on the place. I think we started very low at like 610. And I was afraid that they would be like, whoa, that is like way too low. But they ended up coming back with a $679,000 offer, which was still quite high and still really not in the price range that we were wanting to be at. So we went back and forth for a little bit, and final offer was $658,000, which is $8,000 more than what I wanted to pay. But I was asking for advice and someone was like, are you really willing to lose this place for $8,000? I think like in the grand scheme of things, $8,000 is not really going to impact you all that much. So I was like, no, you're right. This is really where we want to be. And that's kind of how we ended up buying the place that we were renting. And the best part about it is we didn't actually have to physically move anything anywhere. We just kind of stayed put. We did make some, I guess, home improvements a little bit over the last few months. We changed up the blinds a little bit, but for the most part, we are keeping it as is. And we are very, very happy with the place and the decision to stay there. In terms of the down payment, I wanted to touch on this. I have been very transparent and honest with you guys about the numbers of our home. I also am mindful and want to protect the privacy of my partner. Obviously, he's not the one on camera saying all these things, so I don't want to touch on his finances, but I'm happy to talk about mine. So we decided on putting down a $100,000 down payment on the home, and for myself, I used my RRSP, that is my retirement account for anyone who's not in Canada. The government allows you to take up to $35,000 from your RRSPs, and then they also introduced an FHSA account last year, which was a first home savings account, and you can put up to $8,000 in there. There was a thing where you can kind of put what you have in your RRSP into your FHSA. So what I ended up doing is using $35,000 from my RRSP, and I also put down $8,000 from my RRSP to my FHSA, but technically everything is from my RRSPs. So that takes us to $43,000, and I still needed to find $7,000, and I just took that from my tax-free savings account that is invested. So I sold some stocks and took out $7,000 from that. That comprised of my half of the $50K of a down payment. That is how I funded my down payment. The other thing is closing costs. I was very, very adamant and wanted to know from my real estate agent ahead of time how much of a closing cost we would be looking at. Oh, there was like a percentage. I want to say like 1% of the purchase price. I could be wrong. I think we ended up paying like $11,000 in closing costs or closing fees. So that is how I financed my home, my down payment, and our monthly payment right now, I think hovers around the $3,000 mark, obviously split in half between my partner and I. I mean, you guys see it in my monthly money videos, how much I pay in my mortgage. It's $813 bi-weekly. I feel like that is manageable. It is a little bit more than how much we paid on a monthly basis for rent, but it's not as much. And I think it would have been the same if we upgraded to just renting, and that rent would not be going towards anything. So I think that we made the right decision. Very happy with the fact that we're staying put. I wanted to just open up about my home buying process. If you guys have any questions, if you're in Vancouver and need a real estate agent recommendation, let me know. I'm happy to pass along my friend's information. But yeah, if I missed anything, let me know down below. And if not, I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.